Chapter 1. The Unfinished Masterpiece. Think about the devices we rely on every single day. When you purchase a new piece of technology, you take it out of the box, and it is entirely complete. The hardware is fixed. The screen, the processors, the memory chips, they are exactly what they will be until the day the device finally breaks down and is thrown away. It does not grow. It does not adapt. It operates strictly within the boundaries of its original design. We are so surrounded by this kind of rigid technology that we have unconsciously started to think of ourselves in the exact same way. We talk about being hardwired for certain behaviors. We imagine our minds as complex computers, processing inputs and delivering outputs through static, unchanging circuitry. But this metaphor is not just slightly inaccurate, it is completely, fundamentally wrong. To understand who you really are, we have to look away from machines and look out into the wild. Picture a newborn animal on a sweeping savanna. Minutes after a young deer or antelope drops to the earth, it begins to struggle to its feet. Within an hour, it is not just standing, it is running. It knows how to nurse, it knows to fear a predator, and it instinctively understands how to move its body through space. It arrives into the world possessing a stunning pre-programmed competence. It is a masterpiece of biological engineering. Now, picture a human infant. A human baby is profoundly, almost shockingly helpless. It cannot lift its own head. It cannot locate food on its own. For months it cannot even roll over, let alone crawl or walk. It will take years for this child to learn how to tie a shoe, and over a decade to gather enough contextual understanding to simply survive independently in the world. If you were looking at this from an outsider's perspective, you might think humans were a massive evolutionary failure. Why would nature design a creature so deeply vulnerable, demanding such intense, exhausting care for such a prolonged period of time? The answer to that question unlocks the greatest secret of human potential. The newborn animal on the savanna runs immediately because its brain is already built. It is hardwired. It comes off the assembly line finished, optimized for a very specific environment. If you took that same animal and dropped it into a bustling city, or a snowy mountaintop, or the middle of a dense rainforest, it would perish. Its pre-programmed instincts would fail, and it would not be able to rewrite its own code fast enough to survive. We, on the other hand, are born half-baked. We are intentionally left unfinished. Instead of arriving in the world with a brain fully wired and ready for a specific environment, we arrive with a brain that is eagerly waiting to be built by the world it finds itself in. This profound vulnerability is our ultimate superpower. It is the reason humans can thrive in the freezing snowscapes of the Arctic, the blistering heat of the desert, the concrete canyons of modern cities, and even the zero-gravity vacuum of outer space. We do not arrive with a survival manual permanently written into our heads. Instead, we arrive with a blank, endlessly adaptable architecture that writes the manual based on whatever experiences we encounter. Imagine what is happening inside the dark, silent vault of a newborn skull. It is not a computer waiting to be turned on. It is a living, breathing, pulsing ecosystem. When a child hears a parent sing a lullaby, sees the contrast of light and shadow on a bedroom wall, or feels the rough texture of a blanket, these are not just fleeting experiences. They are construction materials. Every sound, every touch, every sight triggers a microscopic storm of electrical activity, forging physical bridges between neurons. The brain is quite literally weaving itself into existence, using the outside world as its thread. But this is not just a story about childhood. This is a story about you, right now, wherever you are in your life. We tend to believe that once we reach adulthood, our physical development is over. We think our personalities are set in stone, our abilities are capped, and our habits are permanent fixtures of our identity. We use phrases like, "that is just the way I am," or "I am too old to change." We treat ourselves like that fixed piece of technology, assuming our hardware is locked. Yet the biological reality of your brain tells a completely different story. Your brain is not a static object. It is an ongoing event. It is constantly remodeling its own circuitry. Think about a time when you had to learn something deeply unfamiliar and complex. Maybe it was learning to drive a car with a manual transmission, or learning to speak a foreign language, or perhaps starting a new job that required you to use entirely new software. Do you remember the sheer exhaustion of those early days? The intense, draining friction of trying to coordinate your hands, your feet, and your attention all at once? Every action required massive conscious effort. It felt awkward, clumsy, and overwhelming. But then, consider what happened weeks or months later. The friction vanished. What once required all your focus became completely automatic. You could shift gears while drinking coffee and holding a conversation. You could dream in the new language. You navigated the complex software without even looking at the keyboard. What changed? Your soul did not change. The difficulty of the task did not change. What changed was the physical structure inside your head. Faced with a new demand, your brain did not just store new memories like a hard drive saving a file. It physically altered its own landscape. It carved new roads, reinforced heavily trafficked pathways, and dismantled the old, unused trails. It reshaped itself to perfectly match the shape of the challenge you gave it. This is the most breathtaking realization about human existence. You are never the same person twice. The conversations you have, the books you read, the challenges you endure, the heartbreak you suffer, and the triumphs you celebrate, they do not just bounce off you, they physically rewrite you. When you truly internalize this, your entire perspective on life shifts. If you feel stuck in a rut, if you feel trapped by anxiety, or if you feel like you lack a certain talent, it is incredibly liberating to realize that your current state is not a life sentence. It is merely a snapshot of your brain's current configuration. The architecture is living, the blueprint is open. Our unceasing ability to change is not just a biological quirk. It is the defining feature of what it means to be human. We are not rigid machines destined to follow a pre-written script. We are dynamic, shifting landscapes. We are born unfinished, and the beautiful truth is that we remain unfinished until our very last breath. Every new dawn is an invitation to rebuild, to rewire, and to reinvent. You are a living masterpiece, and the brush is entirely in your hands. Chapter 2. The World as the Architect. We have been taught a very comforting, very simple story about how we are made. It is the story of the blueprint. We are told that hidden deep inside every cell of our bodies is a master plan, written in the code of our DNA, that dictates exactly who we are, what we will look like, and how our minds will function. According to this story, your genetic code is the architect, the builder, and the final inspector of your life. But if you were to look closely at the sheer complexity of a human brain, you would quickly realize the mathematics simply do not add up. Your DNA contains a finite amount of instructions. It is a remarkably small instruction manual for a project as infinitely complex as human consciousness. There is simply not enough genetic code to perfectly wire the billions of neurons and trillions of connections inside your head. It is like trying to build a sprawling 100-story metropolis using nothing but a rough sketch on a single napkin. So how does the brain actually get built? Nature, in its boundless wisdom, came up with a breathtakingly elegant solution. It stopped trying to write all the instructions down in the genes. Instead, it decided to let the outside world finish the job. Your brain is born into this world with a massive, chaotic overabundance of potential. Imagine a wild, overgrown jungle. When an infant first opens its eyes, its brain is teeming with an excessive number of connections. Every neuron is reaching out frantically, connecting to everything else, forming a dense, noisy, hypersensitive web of raw possibility. The infant has the innate capacity to learn any language ever spoken, to adapt to any climate on Earth, to master any physical skill. They are a creature of pure, unfiltered potential. But potential is heavy. Potential is inefficient. To actually function in the world, to become a distinct individual, the brain must sacrifice the infinite in order to master the specific, and it relies entirely on the outside world to tell it what to keep and what to destroy. This is the great secret of our development. Your brain is sculpted not by what it grows, but by what it tears down. Picture a massive block of beautiful, uncut marble. The sculpture hidden within does not emerge by adding more stone. It emerges through the forceful, deliberate strikes of a chisel, chipping away everything that is not the final masterpiece. For the human mind, experience is the chisel. When a child is born into a home where two parents speak a specific language, the child's brain is initially capable of hearing and distinguishing every phonetic sound used in every language across the globe. They can hear the subtle clicks of certain African dialects, the rolling rhythms of Spanish, the complex tonal shifts of Mandarin, and the harsh consonants of German. But as the days turn into weeks and the weeks into months, the child's brain is constantly listening to the specific environment of their living room. The brain notices which sounds are constantly repeated and which sounds are never used. Because the brain is obsessed with efficiency, it begins a ruthless process of pruning. It thinks, I am expending valuable energy, keeping the neural pathways open for sounds I never hear. We do not need these. And so, it dismantles those bridges. It physically destroys the connections that process the unused sounds, and it takes those raw materials and uses them to reinforce the pathways for the language actually being spoken in the home. By the time that child is a few years old, they have lost the ability to even hear the differences in foreign sounds, let alone pronounce them perfectly. They have sacrificed the ability to speak every language so they can flawlessly speak their own. The outside world acted as the architect, walking through the unfinished halls of the brain, locking doors that were not needed and reinforcing the walls of the rooms that were used every day. This profoundly beautiful, slightly terrifying process happens with absolutely everything. Your brain opens biological windows of time, waiting for the world to provide the necessary materials. It expects the world to be there. It expects light to flood into the eyes, providing the visual data needed to build the brain's visual cortex. If a child were to be born with cataracts that block light, and those cataracts were left untreated for the first few years of life, the brain would eventually give up on waiting for the visual data. It would repurpose that dark, unused visual real estate for other senses like hearing or touch. Even if the eyes were perfectly repaired later in life, the person would remain blind. The eyes would work, but the brain's visual architecture would have been given away to other tenants. The window closed. The world did not arrive in time. But this is not just about physical senses or language. It is about the very core of our humanity. The brain expects an environment of emotional warmth, of touch, of eye contact, and of love. Imagine a child born into a deeply impoverished emotional environment. Imagine a household defined by severe neglect, where cries are never answered, where there is no gentle rocking, no soothing whispers, no comforting touch. The infant's brain opens its emotional windows, desperately waiting for the building materials of human connection. It waits for the signals that say, you are safe, you belong, the world is a secure place. When those signals never come, the brain assumes it has been born into a barren, hostile world. It adapts to the environment it is given. It prunes away the delicate neural networks designed for deep trust, empathy, and emotional regulation, because those traits are a liability in a world devoid of care. Instead, it heavily fortifies the ancient, primitive alarm systems. It wires itself for constant hypervigilance, for fear, for survival. The tragedy is not just a psychological one. It is a profound physical restructuring. The environment literally starved the brain of the nutrients it needed to build the architecture of love. This is why the environment you are in is not just a backdrop to your life, it is the very substance of your mind. We often look at the circumstances of our lives, the city we live in, the people we spend our time with, the media we consume, as external things. We think of ourselves as passengers looking out the window of a train, observing the passing scenery. But the biological reality is far more intimate. The scenery is getting inside the train. The scenery is dismantling the seats, changing the engine, and rewriting the destination. Understanding this changes the way we must look at our own lives, right here, right now. Yes, the most dramatic remodeling of the brain happens in childhood, but the chisel never truly stops striking the marble. The brain remains soft, hungry, and responsive to the world until the day we die. If you spend your days surrounded by cynical, deeply negative people, your brain will physically optimize itself to process cynicism and negativity. It will widen the highways of complaint and board up the windows of optimism. If you immerse yourself in an environment of constant digital distraction, your brain will dismantle its capacity for deep, sustained focus because the environment is telling it that rapid, shallow attention is what is required to survive. You are not a finished product acting upon the world. You are a continuous collaboration with the world. If you want to change who you are, you cannot simply rely on sheer willpower, fighting against the current of a hostile environment. You must change the architect. You must intentionally curate the world around you. You must seek out environments that demand the very best of you. Surround yourself with ideas that stretch your understanding and walk into rooms where the conversations force your brain to build new, beautiful bridges. The world is constantly pouring into you, shaping the landscape of your mind. The only question is, what kind of world are you letting in? Chapter 3. The Shifting Map. Within. Think for a moment about a map of the world. Whether it is an old yellowed parchment rolling out across a wooden table, or a digital grid glowing softly on the screen of your phone, every map you have ever used shares one fundamental characteristic. It is fixed. The borders of a country do not shift while you are looking at them. The shape of a continent does not spontaneously expand overnight. A map is a frozen snapshot of reality, designed to give you a reliable, unchanging sense of where things are. Because we rely on these static maps to navigate the outside world, we naturally assume the inner workings of our own bodies are organized in the exact same way. If you were to peer deep into the architecture of your brain, you would indeed find a map. Right across the surface of your cerebral cortex, there is a physical, geographical representation of your entire body. Every square inch of your skin, every muscle, every finger, and every toe has a specific corresponding territory of brain tissue dedicated to feeling and moving it. But if you could actually look at this map, you would be deeply unsettled. First, you would notice that it is grotesquely distorted. On this internal map, your hands are absolutely massive, taking up vast tracts of neurological real estate. Your lips and your tongue are gigantic, sprawling across the territory. Meanwhile, your back and your thighs, despite being the largest physical parts of your body, are relegated to tiny, almost insignificant slivers of space. Nature does not allocate brain space based on physical size. It allocates space based on necessity. Your hands and your face are your primary tools for interacting with the world. They require immense sensitivity and complex movement, so the brain grants them the largest plots of land. But the distortion is not the most incredible thing about this inner map. The truly breathtaking reality, the fact that changes everything about how we understand human potential, is that this map is not drawn in ink, it is drawn in sand, and the winds of your daily experience are constantly blowing across it, moving the borders, expanding the continents, and swallowing up the unused land. In the real estate market of the human brain, there is a ruthless, unforgiving economy. Brain tissue is the most valuable commodity in your body. It consumes massive amounts of energy, and there is a strictly limited supply of it inside the dark vault of your skull. Because space is so precious, the brain operates on a strict policy of use it or lose it. And it does not wait years to enforce this policy. It acts continuously, day by day, hour by hour. Imagine a person who decides, later in life, to learn to play the cello. When they first sit down and wrap their left hand around the neck of the instrument, their fingers are clumsy and weak. Pressing down on the thick steel strings causes sharp pain. Their brain is struggling to coordinate the complex, independent movements required of the left hand, while the right hand merely draws the bow. But they do not quit. They practice for an hour every evening. They endure the blisters. They push through the frustration. What is happening inside their head during those evenings of practice is nothing short of geographical terraforming. As the left hand demands more and more precision, the brain realizes that the tiny sliver of territory currently assigned to those fingertips is no longer sufficient. The demand has outpaced the supply. So, the brain begins to physically annex neighboring territory. The borders of the left hand on the internal map begin to push outward. Over months and years of practice, the brain tissue dedicated to the fingers of that left hand will physically expand, growing significantly larger than the territory dedicated to the right hand. The musician literally reshapes their own biology to support their passion. The brain willingly surrenders its precious real estate to whatever the individual demands of it. However, this incredible adaptability comes with a fierce flip side. Because space is limited, expansion in one area means another area must be conquered. If you stop using a part of your body, the brain does not just leave that territory sitting empty, waiting loyally for your return. The brain abhors a vacuum. Consider what happens when you break an arm and have to wear a heavy, rigid cast for 2 months. For those 8 weeks, your arm is immobilized. The muscles cannot move, and the skin is shielded from the rich textures and shifting temperatures of the outside world. The arm goes silent. Deep inside the brain, the bustling territory that used to manage that arm suddenly stops receiving traffic. For a brief moment, it waits. But very quickly, the surrounding territories, perhaps the areas representing the shoulder or the chest or the face, look over the border and notice a vast tract of prime, unused neurological real estate. and they invade. Without you ever feeling it, the active parts of your body begin to wire themselves into the silent territory of the casted arm. The map is aggressively redrawn. This is why, when the cast finally comes off, the arm does not just feel weak because the muscles have atrophied. It feels profoundly strange, heavy, and disconnected. It feels almost alien. It takes time, effort, and physical therapy not just to rebuild the muscle, but to fight a neurological war. You have to force the invaders out. You have to use the arm relentlessly to reclaim its stolen territory on the map of your mind. This invisible war for real estate is happening inside you right now, every single second of every single day. Every habit you hold, every routine you repeat, every skill you practice, and every hour you spend on the couch is a direct command given to the cartographers of your brain. Your actions are constantly carving the borders of your identity. When you devote hours of your life to a new endeavor, whether it is writing a book, building a business, or learning to deeply listen to your partner, you are literally building the physical infrastructure to make that endeavor easier tomorrow. You are claiming territory. But if you abandon a dream, if you let a skill rust, or if you surrender to apathy, that territory is slowly, quietly taken over by whatever else you spend your time doing. We often speak of finding ourselves, as if our true identity is a hidden treasure buried deep within, waiting patiently to be discovered. But biology tells us a far more empowering truth. You are not something to be found. You are something to be forged. Your identity is not a static map hidden in the glove compartment of your life. It is a living, breathing landscape, and your daily choices are the tectonic plates shifting beneath the surface. You become what you do, not metaphorically, but literally. The geography of your mind is a direct reflection of how you spend your days. The only question you must ask yourself is, what kind of map are you drawing today? Chapter 4. Limitless Vessels. Redefining the Human Form. Close your eyes for a moment and consider the strange, solitary existence of your brain. It is the absolute center of your universe, the seat of your consciousness, the quiet room where every thought, dream, and fear is born. Yet for all its immense power, your brain is trapped in absolute darkness. It is encased in a thick vault of bone. It has no windows to look out of. It has no ears to listen through. It has no hands to reach out and touch the wind. Your brain has never directly seen a sunset, heard a symphony, or felt the warmth of a fire. So, how do you experience the vibrant, colorful, incredibly loud world around you? The answer lies in translation. Everything you perceive as reality is actually brought to your brain through dark, silent biological cables we call nerves. When light bounces off a red apple and hits the back of your eye translates that light into a series of microscopic electrical pulses. When a musician strikes a chord on a guitar, your ear translates those sound waves into the exact same kind of electrical pulses. To your brain, sitting in the dark, there is absolutely no fundamental difference between the signal for the color red and the signal for a musical note. It is all just electricity. It is a universal code of spikes and quiet spaces. Your brain is simply the ultimate general-purpose decoding machine. It takes all these millions of identical electrical spikes flooding in the dark and figures out what patterns they form. It learns that this specific pattern of spikes means apple, and that pattern means music. Once you truly grasp this, you arrive at one of the most staggering realizations about human biology. Your brain does not actually care where the data comes from. It is completely indifferent to the biological hardware you were born with. We tend to believe that our eyes are the only way to see and our ears are the only way to hear. But what if those biological portals are damaged? What if someone lives their entire life in darkness, never having seen a human face? Because the brain is a brilliant, flexible decoder, it does not mourn the loss of the eyes. It simply waits for the data to be routed through a different door. Imagine taking a high-definition video camera and attaching it to the forehead of a person who cannot see. Instead of sending the video feed to a screen, the camera translates the pixels of the video into a grid of tiny, vibrating motors placed flat against the person's back. When a car drives past the camera from left to right, a wave of buzzing sweeps across their back from left to right. When an object gets closer, expanding in the camera's view, a circle of vibration grows larger on their skin. On the first day, if you ask this person what they feel, they will tell you they just feel a confusing, itchy buzzing on their skin. It makes no sense. The brain is receiving a chaotic storm of electrical spikes from the nerves in the back, and it has no idea what to do with them. But leave the camera on. Let them walk through the world, bumping into tables, reaching for doorknobs, constantly feeling the buzzing change as they move. Days pass, weeks pass. Slowly, a profound miracle of biology takes place in the dark vault of the skull. The brain begins to recognize the patterns. It realizes that when the person reaches out and feels the physical shape of a cup with their hands, a very specific vibrating circle appears on their back. The brain connects the dots. Eventually, the person stops feeling the buzzing on their back entirely. The feeling of vibration vanishes from their conscious awareness. Instead, they begin to perceive depth. They begin to sense objects out in space before they touch them. If you throw a ball at them, they will step out of the way, not because they felt a buzz, but because their brain translated the tactile data into a spatial reality. They are quite literally seeing through their skin. The brain simply accepted a new input, learned the language of the vibrating grid, and created vision out of touch. It is the ultimate plug-and-play device. But this astonishing flexibility does not end with how we take the world in. It extends to how we push our will out into the world. If the brain is completely adaptable to any incoming sensory data, it is equally adaptable to any outgoing physical machinery. We assume that we are meant to operate exactly one biological body, 2 arms, 2 legs, 10 fingers, 10 toes. We view our bodies as fixed vessels, but to your brain, your body is just a vehicle it learned how to drive. When you were an infant, your brain had to painstakingly figure out which electrical signals to send down, which cables to make an arm bend or a hand grasp. It mapped the machinery it was given. What happens if you change the machinery? Consider someone who has suffered a catastrophic spinal cord injury, leaving them completely unable to move their arms or legs. Their brain is still perfectly healthy, still generating the complex electrical commands for movement, but the cables connecting to the limbs have been cut. The commands have nowhere to go. Now, imagine we bypass the broken cables. We place a sensor directly on the surface of their brain to listen to those movement commands, and we connect that sensor to a massive robotic arm bolted to the side of a wheelchair. At first, it is immensely frustrating. The person tries to think about moving the metal arm, but the machine merely twitches. The brain is trying to drive a completely foreign vehicle, but once again, time and persistence unlock the magic. As the person concentrates, the brain begins to adjust its outgoing signals. It realizes, through trial and error, which specific patterns of thought cause the robotic fingers to open and which cause them to close. Within a matter of months, the person no longer has to consciously think about complex sequences of commands. They simply look at a cup of coffee on the table, decide they want to drink it, and the robotic arm smoothly reaches out, grasps the handle, and brings it to their lips. The most beautiful part of this is not the technology, it is the psychology. If you ask this person how it feels to use the robotic arm, they will not tell you it feels like operating a heavy piece of machinery. They will tell you it feels like their arm. The brain has expanded its internal map. It has embraced the cold steel, the plastic joints, and the mechanical whirring, and it has boldly declared, "This is part of me now." This revelation shatters every boundary we have ever placed around human potential. The human form is not a limitation, it is merely a starting point. We are not trapped in the bodies we were born with. Our minds are deeply, profoundly expansive. In the future, we will not just heal the broken, we will expand the healthy. If your brain can learn to drive a robotic arm to replace a lost limb, it can just as easily learn to drive a third arm while your natural hands type on a keyboard. It can learn to operate a drone flying overhead, feeling the wind resistance against the propellers as if it were the skin of your own body. We are not rigid, fixed beings. We are fluid, boundless entities locked inside temporary vessels, limited only by the depth of our imagination and the courage to plug into the unknown. We are truly limitless. Chapter 5. The Compass of Change, Relevance and Surprise. We move through our days under a very persistent illusion. We tend to believe that our eyes and ears are functioning like a constantly rolling video camera, capturing everything we experience and storing it away in the massive archives of our minds. We assume that if we are simply present in a room, our brain is faithfully recording the event. But if you were to genuinely reflect on what you remember from last Tuesday, or even yesterday afternoon, you would realize something startling. Almost all of it is gone. You have navigated thousands of conversations, driven past tens of thousands of trees, and looked at millions of faces in your lifetime, and the vast, overwhelming majority of them vanished from your memory the moment they passed out of your sight. Your brain is not a passive recording device. It is an intensely stubborn, highly selective gatekeeper. It refuses to change its physical structure for just any random piece of information that happens to float by. It requires an incredibly specific set of conditions before it will agree to lay down new physical pathways. To understand how to consciously reshape your own mind, you must understand the two master keys that unlock the vault of change. The first key is relevance. Think about a high school student sitting in a sterile classroom staring blankly at a textbook, trying to memorize a list of foreign language vocabulary words for an upcoming exam. The student does not care about the language. They have no intention of visiting the country where it is spoken. The only reason they are looking at the words is because an authority figure told them they must. They read the list over and over, trying to force the information into their head through sheer, brutal repetition. They might retain just enough to pass the test on Friday, but by Monday morning, the words have evaporated like mist. Now, imagine a completely different scenario. A person is traveling alone in a foreign country. They take the wrong train late at night and end up in a small, isolated village. Their phone battery is dead. It is raining, and they are hopelessly lost. They manage to find a small, dimly lit tavern, and they desperately need to ask the bartender how to find a place to sleep. Their heart is pounding. The stakes are intensely real. In that panicked, adrenaline-fueled moment, the bartender teaches them 3 simple words in the local dialect to point them toward an inn. That traveler will never, for the rest of their entire life, forget those 3 words. They did not need a textbook. They did not need to repeat them 50 times. What is the biological difference between the bored student and the lost traveler? It comes down to a chemical bath. When you experience something that truly matters to you, something tied to your survival, your deep emotional needs, your passions, or your fears, your brain floods itself with a cocktail of powerful chemicals. These chemicals act like a giant neon highlighter pen. They wash over the neural networks and send a clear, undeniable signal. This is important. Do not let this go. Wire this in permanently. If you do not genuinely care about what you are doing, your brain keeps its chemical highlighters capped. You can go through the motions, you can spend hours practicing a skill or reading a book, but if it lacks deep personal relevance, the brain simply refuses to invest the energy to build new architecture. If you want to learn, if you want to grow, you cannot just rely on discipline. You have to find a way to make it matter. You have to manufacture stakes. But relevance alone is not enough. You can care deeply about something, but if your environment never shifts, your brain will still fall asleep. This brings us to the second and perhaps most powerful key to transformation: surprise. At its core, your brain is a brilliant, tireless prediction machine. Its ultimate goal is to figure out the rules of the world so perfectly that it never has to think about them again. Conscious thought takes a massive amount of energy, and your brain is designed to conserve energy at all costs. It wants to put your life on autopilot. Consider the experience of driving your daily commute. Do you remember the first time you drove to a new home or a new job? You were hyper-aware. You noticed every stop sign, every curve in the road, the specific color of the house where you needed to turn. Your brain was awake, frantically drawing a map. But after you have driven that exact same route 200 times, what happens? You pull into your driveway, turn off the engine, and suddenly realize you have absolutely no memory of the last 5 miles. You were entirely unconscious of the drive because your brain's predictions were flawless. It knew exactly when the light would turn red. It knew exactly how sharp the curve was. Because reality perfectly matched the brain's internal model, no alarms went off, no new information was needed. When everything goes exactly as expected, the brain goes into standby mode. No rewiring occurs. The only time your brain is forced to change is when it makes a prediction and the prediction is wrong. Imagine you are on that exact same mundane commute, driving on autopilot. But today, the city has closed the main bridge for construction. You are forced off your familiar path and onto a maze of unfamiliar, winding back roads. Instantly, the autopilot disengages. Your grip on the steering wheel tightens. You turn down the volume on the radio. Your eyes dart from street signs to landmarks. You are intensely, vividly alive in the present moment. Your brain expected a smooth highway, and instead, it got a detour. That gap between what was expected and what actually happened is called a prediction error. And that error is the single greatest engine of human growth. The shock of the unexpected forces the brain to wake up, grab its tools, and start building new roads. This is why mastery is a dangerous plateau. When you become incredibly good at a sport, a musical instrument, or your profession, you stop making mistakes. You stop being surprised. You find a comfortable rhythm where your predictions always match reality. It feels good. It feels safe. But from a neurological standpoint, it is a dead end. If you want to keep the architecture of your mind alive, flexible, and growing, you must actively court surprise. You must deliberately step into spaces where you do not know the outcome. You must play against opponents who are better than you, read books that challenge your deepest assumptions, and walk into rooms where you are the least knowledgeable person there. Growth is not found in the comfortable embrace of the expected. It is found in the sudden, jarring shock of the unfamiliar. When you combine deep, passionate relevance with a constant, deliberate pursuit of surprise, you unlock the absolute height of human adaptability. You become a person who does not just age, but who endlessly evolves. Chapter 6. The Inner Battlefield. Competition and Balance. Imagine standing deep in the heart of a primordial rainforest. If you simply glance around, it looks like a picture of absolute serenity. It appears to be a harmonious, perfectly balanced tapestry of vibrant green life. But if you look closer, down at the tangled roots and up at the sprawling canopy, you will quickly realize that you are standing in the middle of a ruthless, unending war zone. Every single vine, every fern, and every towering tree is locked in a desperate, silent battle for the most precious resource in the forest: sunlight. If a plant stops reaching, if it stops fighting for its space in the canopy, the surrounding foliage will mercilessly close over it, stealing its light and condemning it to wither in the shadows. There is no true peace in the jungle. There is only an aggressive, dynamic equilibrium held together by the relentless drive to survive. The landscape inside your skull is exactly the same. We have a comforting tendency to imagine our minds as well-organized, highly civilized corporations. We picture different departments sitting quietly in their assigned offices. The vision department down the hall, the hearing department on the second floor, the memory department in the basement, all politely doing their jobs and respecting each other's boundaries. But the biological reality is far more dramatic and infinitely more profound. Your mind is a fiercely competitive ecosystem. The neural territories inside you are constantly fighting for survival, and the currency they are fighting over is not sunlight. It is data. It is the information flowing in from the outside world. Every skill you possess, every memory you hold, and every habit you enact is backed by a physical network of neurons that demands continuous electrical nourishment. If a network stops receiving input, if you stop using a particular ability or ignore a certain way of thinking, the surrounding networks do not politely look the other way. They are hungry. They are expanding. They will aggressively invade the unused territory, dismantling the old connections and repurposing the real estate for their own needs. This means that your brain is constantly balanced on a razor's edge between two completely opposing forces: the desperate need to change and the absolute necessity to stay the same. Think about a block of clay sitting on a sculptor's table. If the clay is too wet, it is infinitely malleable. You can effortlessly mold it into the shape of a face, a building, or a bird. But the moment you take your hands away, it loses its structural integrity. It sags and collapses back into an unrecognizable puddle. It cannot hold a memory. On the other hand, if the clay is too dry and hardened, it will maintain its current shape forever, standing strong against the wind and time. But you can never mold it into anything new. It cannot adapt. It cannot learn. Your brain must constantly walk this impossible tightrope. If it were entirely fluid, you would be able to learn a new language in a day, but you would completely forget who you were by tomorrow morning. Every new experience would wash away the old ones. If it were completely rigid, you would possess a flawless, permanent memory of your childhood, but you would be utterly incapable of adjusting to a new job, a new relationship, or a changing world. To survive, the human brain has mastered the art of living at the critical edge of chaos. It builds structures that are just strong enough to hold the core of your identity, but just porous enough to let the future in. But maintaining this balance in a fiercely competitive internal environment requires extraordinary defensive measures, especially when the flow of information suddenly stops. Consider the profound vulnerability of your sense of sight. Vision requires an enormous amount of neurological real estate. It is the crown jewel of human perception. But every single night, the sun goes down, you close your eyes, and you plunge that massive territory into absolute darkness. For 8 hours, the visual cortex receives zero data from the outside world. In the aggressive ecosystem of the brain, this sudden silence is a crisis. While your eyes are closed, your ears are still actively listening to the wind outside the window or the hum of a fan. Your skin is still actively feeling the weight of the blankets and the temperature of the room. The territories of hearing and touch are awake, and they are situated right next door to the massive, suddenly inactive territory of vision. Given the ruthless nature of the brain's real estate market, those active senses should immediately begin invading the visual cortex. So, how does your visual system survive the night without being conquered? It fights back from the inside. Evolution engineered a breathtakingly elegant defense mechanism to protect your visual territory in the dark. Every 90 minutes, while you are fast asleep, a specialized circuit deep in the base of your brain fires a blast of raw, random electrical activity straight into your visual cortex. It forcibly wakes the visual system up, commanding it to start processing data even though your eyes are firmly shut. Because there is no external light coming in, your visual cortex has to make sense of this random electrical storm on its own. It frantically stitches these signals together into a montage of images, memories, and bizarre narratives. You find yourself flying through the sky, wandering through impossible architectures, or having urgent conversations with people you have not seen in decades. We call these experiences dreams. We have spent thousands of years attributing profound mystical significance to them. But at their core, they are a biological defense maneuver. The visual cortex is generating its own internal data to keep its territory active and armed. It is firing its weapons into the dark to keep the invading senses at bay until the sun rises and the eyes open again. Your nightly dreams are the echoes of an invisible internal war. When you understand that this kind of fierce competition is the baseline of your existence, you begin to look at your daily choices in a completely new light. Your identity is not a fortress built of stone. It is a garden that must be endlessly cultivated and fiercely protected. The values you hold dear, the patience you try to exhibit, the curiosity you want to maintain, none of these are permanent installations. They are living territories. If you stop practicing empathy, the real estate dedicated to understanding others will eventually be conquered by the louder, more frequently used pathways of judgment or apathy. If you stop challenging yourself to learn, the beautiful, complex architecture of your curiosity will be dismantled and paved over by the rigid, efficient highways of routine. You are the commander of this internal battlefield. You do not just passively experience your life, you actively direct the distribution of resources, where you focus your attention, where you spend your time, and the challenges you willingly endure. These are the sunlight that feeds the canopy. The struggle never ends, but that is precisely what makes you so magnificent. You are a living, breathing work in progress, forever fighting to become the person you choose to be. Chapter 7. The Fading Spark. Time and Adaptability. Have you ever watched a 5-year-old child pick up a new piece of technology? They do not look for a manual. They do not ask for step-by-step instructions. They simply take the device, begin tapping the screen, swiping through menus, and within minutes, they have intuitively mapped out the entire interface. They move with a fearless, fluid grace. Meanwhile, an adult might stare at that exact same screen with hesitation, afraid to press the wrong button, completely overwhelmed by the novel interface. We see this contrast everywhere in life. We see it when a child effortlessly absorbs a second language just by playing with neighbors in a new country, while an adult spends years with expensive tutors and daily practice still struggling heavily with the accent and grammar. There is a deeply ingrained belief in our culture, captured perfectly in the old adage, that you simply cannot teach an old dog new tricks. We almost universally view this loss of mental agility as a tragic decline. We think of aging as a slow, inevitable dimming of the lights, a gradual loss of the brain's magical, sponge-like plasticity. But if you step back and look at this process through the lens of pure survival, This loss of flexibility is not a biological failure at all. It is an absolute triumph. It is the ultimate necessary goal of the brain's entire journey. Imagine a vast, untouched wilderness. When you are born, your mind is like that wild, overgrown landscape. If you need to get from one side to the other, you have to literally hack your way through the thick underbrush. Every single step is slow, exhausting, and requires massive amounts of conscious energy. You try one direction, hit a dense thicket, backtrack, and try another. This is the state of childhood. It is a period of pure, unadulterated exploration. The young brain is violently open to everything, forming millions of fragile new connections because it does not yet know what information will be necessary to survive in its specific environment. But as you grow, you begin to find paths that actually work. You find the neural routes that lead to walking, to speaking your native language, to reading social cues, and to protecting yourself from danger. You start walking these specific paths repeatedly. Slowly, the thick underbrush is cleared away. The dirt is packed down flat. What was once an exhausting, chaotic trek becomes a reliable, easy dirt road. And as you reach full adulthood, the brain does something truly magnificent to solidify your survival. It takes those reliable dirt roads and it paves them over with thick concrete. It builds massive, high-speed, multi-lane highways. In a physical sense, the brain achieves this by coating its most heavily used neural pathways in a dense biological insulation. This insulation acts exactly like the thick rubber coating around a heavy-duty electrical wire. It prevents the signal from leaking out, allowing the electrical impulses to travel at blistering, frictionless speeds. This is the reason you can drive a car down a busy street, listen to the radio, and hold a complex conversation all at the exact same time without your brain shutting down from the effort. Your mind has achieved maximum efficiency. It has successfully transitioned from the chaotic, exhausting phase of exploration into the highly optimized phase of exploitation. It exploits the knowledge and skills it has already gathered so you can navigate the world with minimal effort. But here is the cruel, beautiful catch of human biology. Efficiency is the absolute enemy of flexibility. When you pave a highway, you guarantee a fast, incredibly smooth ride. But you also guarantee that the road can no longer be easily moved. You cannot simply pick up a concrete highway and shift it 3 miles to the left just because you changed your mind about the destination. The very biological insulation that makes your adult brain so incredibly fast, capable, and reliable is the exact same mechanism that locks your habits, your biases, and your skills firmly into place. The concrete has hardened. This is exactly why trying to change a deeply ingrained habit or learning a completely new, complex skill later in life feels so incredibly painful and exhausting. When the adult tries to learn a new language, their brain is no longer a soft, malleable sponge eager for new data. The adult brain looks at the strange new sounds and the confusing grammar, looks at the perfectly paved, lightning-fast highways of its native language, and aggressively resists the change. It essentially says, "Why are we expending all this energy? We already have a perfectly good, highly efficient way to communicate. This is a waste of resources." The threshold for change has been raised immensely. The chemical highlighters that flood a child's brain with every new experience, keeping them constantly adaptable, are tightly regulated in an adult. They are kept locked away in a vault, only released for things of absolute, undeniable, life-altering importance. The great emotional and intellectual danger of adulthood is not simply losing our memory. It is falling so deeply in love with our own efficiency that we stop exploring entirely. It is so easy to find a job we can do well, find a group of friends who agree with our worldview, establish a daily routine that is comfortable, and just stay there forever. We let the rest of the wilderness grow dark. We mistake comfort for living. But a mind that is entirely rigid, a mind that refuses to lay down new paths because it is too enamored with its own highways, is a mind that is uniquely vulnerable to a rapidly changing world. If the bridge on your familiar highway collapses and you have forgotten how to walk through the forest, you are truly lost. But the spark is not dead. The profound, life-altering truth is that the machinery of plasticity never truly shuts down. It simply demands much more of you. You can absolutely teach an adult mind new tricks, but you have to make the trick matter deeply, and you have to be willing to endure the heavy friction of the process. If you want to reshape an adult mind, you cannot just casually dabble. You have to bring a sledgehammer to the concrete. You have to actively, intentionally choose the agonizing vulnerability of being a beginner again. You have to walk into rooms where you are the least competent person, and instead of shrinking from the embarrassment of your own clumsiness, you must lean heavily into it. You must embrace the exhaustion. When you are trying to grasp a complex new concept and you feel that dense mental fog, that frustrating sense of friction and incompetence, you must realize that this is not a sign that you are too old or too slow. That frustration is the literal, physical sensation of your brain tearing up the concrete. It is the heavy machinery of your mind finally waking up from its slumber to lay down a new road. It is the precise feeling of growth. We spend the first half of our lives letting the world write its rules upon us, moving from a state of chaotic potential to a state of focused capability. But the second half of life requires a completely different kind of courage. It requires the courage to occasionally dismantle the very things you have so carefully built. It requires the bravery to step off the smooth, fast, comfortable highway and to intentionally wander back out into the dense, untamed wilderness. The spark of transformation is still there, waiting quietly in the dark. You just have to strike the flint hard enough to catch the fire. Chapter 8. The Echoes of Experience. Rethinking Memory. We all carry a deeply comforting delusion about how our own minds work. When we think about our past, the brilliant triumphs, the crushing heartbreaks, the quiet, mundane Tuesday afternoons, we imagine that our brain operates like a massive, infinite library. We believe that every experience we have ever had is carefully recorded, bound into a neat little book, and filed away on a dusty shelf in the back of our heads. According to this comforting story, when you want to remember your high school graduation or the first time you met your best friend, your brain simply walks down the aisles of this library, pulls the correct book off the shelf, and reads it back to you, word for word. We view our memories as perfect, permanent video recordings of reality. But if you look at the biological reality of the human brain, you will not find a library. You will not find a filing cabinet. You will not find a single designated area where memories are kept. That is because a memory is not a physical object that is stored in a location. A memory is an event. It is a temporary, fleeting synchronization of electricity. To understand how staggering this is, imagine you are standing in a crowded, noisy coffee shop right now. You are holding a warm ceramic mug. You are smelling the bitter scent of dark roast. You are listening to a jazz track playing over the speakers, and you are looking at the face of someone you love across the table. When your brain processes this moment, it does not save it as one unified file. Instead, it shatters the experience into thousands of pieces. The visual data of the person's face is processed in the very back of your brain. The scent of the coffee is processed in a completely different area near the center. The sound of the jazz is routed to the sides. The feeling of warmth on your hands is sent up to the top. The experience is blown apart and scattered across the vast, rolling geography of your mind. So, what happens when you try to remember that coffee shop a year later? Your brain does not go to a filing cabinet. Instead, it has to perform an incredibly complex, lightning-fast symphony. It has to send out a synchronized electrical command to all those different far-flung regions of the brain at the exact same millisecond. It forces the visual cortex to replay the face, the olfactory bulb to recreate the smell, and the auditory cortex to echo the music. A memory is not a file you open, it is a live reconstruction. It is an act of sheer biological imagination, rebuilt from scratch every single time. But because memory is a live performance rather than a static recording, it comes with a beautiful, terrifying vulnerability. Every time you recall a past event, you have to put it back together. And when you put it back together, you inevitably mix it with the present moment. Think about one of your absolute favorite childhood memories. Perhaps it is a summer afternoon spent by a lake with your family. In your mind, the memory is vivid and unquestionable. You remember the exact blinding shade of the yellow sun. You remember the stinging cold of the water against your legs. You remember the specific sandwiches your mother packed, and you remember the exact joke your father told that made you laugh until your sides hurt. You would swear in a court of law that this is exactly how it happened. But here is the unsettling truth. That memory is not an accurate recording of the past. It is a mosaic, and many of the tiles are fake. The first time you remembered that day at the lake, perhaps a year after it happened, you rebuilt it perfectly. But the second time you remembered it, you happened to be feeling deeply nostalgic, so your brain painted the sun a little brighter. The fifth time you remembered it, you had recently watched a movie with a similar lake scene, and your brain accidentally grabbed a detail from the movie, perhaps a red canoe in the background, and accidentally glued it into your own memory. The 20th time you remembered it, you were telling the story at a dinner party, and to make the story flow better, you unconsciously altered the timing of your father's joke. Every single time you pulled that memory out, it became biologically soft and pliable again. And when you were done remembering it, you did not put the original version back. You saved the new, slightly altered version over the old one. This process is called reconsolidation, and it means that the memories you feel the most certain about, the stories you have told the most often, are ironically the ones that have been the most heavily edited over time. Your memory is not a perfect archive of what happened. It is simply a record of the last time you remembered it. We might be tempted to view this as a tragic flaw in our design. Why would evolution give us a memory system that is so wildly inaccurate, so easily corrupted by the present moment? Why wouldn't we be built with perfect, infallible recording devices? The answer is that the human brain is not interested in being a historian. It is obsessed with being a prophet. The biological purpose of memory is not to allow you to sit in a rocking chair and reminisce about the good old days. The purpose of memory is strictly survival. Your brain holds on to pieces of the past solely so it can use them as raw materials to predict the future. If you burn your hand on a hot stove, your brain doesn't store that memory just to document the event. It stores it so that tomorrow, when you see a stove, you can instantly predict the pain and pull your hand away before you are burned again. Because the ultimate goal is surviving tomorrow, your brain needs your memories to be flexible. It needs to be able to update them with new information. If a memory were permanently locked in stone, it could not adapt when the world changes. Consider a person who went through a devastating, agonizing breakup in their 20s. At the time, if you asked them to recall the relationship, their memory would be colored entirely by betrayal, intense pain, and a feeling that their life was over. The memory was a source of pure suffering, but imagine speaking to that exact same person 20 years later. They have since found a deeply loving, supportive partner. They have built a beautiful life. If you ask them about that old breakup now, they will not recall the agonizing pain. They will tell you it was a necessary stepping stone. They will remember it as the vital lesson that taught them what they truly needed in a partner. The actual historical events of the breakup did not change. The words that were spoken, the tears that were shed, those are fixed in time. But the memory physically changed. The person's brain went back into the past, pulled up the shattered pieces of that experience, and rewired them to match the wisdom and peace of their present reality. This is the most empowering realization you can possibly have about your own history. Your past is not a heavy, unchangeable anchor dragging behind you. It is entirely fluid. Because your memories are reconstructed in the present moment, your present self is always acting as the editor of your own history. When you change who you are today, you literally change what your past means. If you decide to take a failure that has haunted you for years and finally extract a lesson from it, you are not just changing your perspective. You are physically rewiring the neurological echo of that event. You are dismantling a memory of defeat and rebuilding it into a memory of foundation. You are not a prisoner of the things that have happened to you. You are the architect of how those things live inside you. The echoes of your experience are only as loud, only as painful, and only as permanent as you allow them to be. The ink on the pages of your past is never truly dry. You hold the pen, and with every new day, you get to write the story again. Chapter 9. Beyond Biology, Shaping the Future. Look down at your own hands. Trace the outline of your fingers. Where do you end, and where does the rest of the universe begin? We are taught from childhood that our physical body, wrapped neatly in a protective layer of skin, is the absolute boundary of our existence. We believe that we are self-contained, isolated units walking through a world that is entirely separate from us. Your skin is the border wall. Everything inside is you. Everything outside is not you. But your brain holds a radically different definition of where you end. Remember that your brain is locked in a dark, silent vault. It has never actually seen or touched your skin. It only knows about your hands and your feet because electrical signals travel up the nerves and say, "I am here." But the brain is not rigidly loyal to the biological borders of the flesh. It is a master cartographer, and it is endlessly willing to expand its map to include the outside world. Think about the profound experience of driving a familiar car. When you first get behind the wheel as a teenager, the car feels like a massive, terrifying alien machine. You are intensely aware of your hands gripping the leather, your foot pressing the metal pedal. But what happens after you have driven that same car for a few years? The machine vanishes from your conscious awareness. When you squeeze into a tight parking space, you do not calculate the distance from your eye to the bumper. You simply feel where the edge of the car is. If a tire slips on a patch of ice, you feel the loss of traction in your own stomach. You have not magically grown nerves that extend into the steel and rubber. What has actually happened is far more magnificent. Your brain recognized that you were controlling this machine, and because it is obsessed with efficiency, it physically expanded its internal map of your body. It enveloped the 2 tons of steel, glass, and rubber and wrote it into your neural architecture. For the duration of that drive, the car is no longer a tool you are using. Biologically, the car is you. We see this breathtaking expansion everywhere. Watch a master carpenter wielding a hammer. They do not feel the wooden handle in their palm. Their sensory awareness extends all the way down the shaft, allowing them to feel the exact moment the steel head strikes the nail. Watch a blind person navigating a crowded sidewalk with a cane. The cane is not just a stick they are holding. Their brain has adopted it as a long, highly sensitive finger, projecting their sense of touch out into the space ahead of them. We are not trapped within the confines of our biology. We are sprawling, expansive creatures capable of incorporating the inanimate world directly into our own physical identity. But this magical ability to expand our borders extends far beyond tools and machines. It reaches into the most profound and mysterious aspect of human existence, our connection to one another. Imagine you are standing in a kitchen, talking to a friend while they chop vegetables. Suddenly, the knife slips and they slice their finger. What happens to your body in that exact fraction of a second? You gasp, you flinch, you instinctively pull your own hand back, and a sharp, phantom ache flashes through your own finger. Why does your body react so violently to a wound that is not yours? It is not just a polite social reaction. It is a deeply physiological event. When you see someone else in pain, your brain does not have a separate detached folder labeled "someone else's pain." To understand what your friend is experiencing, your brain is forced to use its own internal architecture. It briefly activates your own pain network. It runs a lightning-fast physical simulation of the injury using your own neural pathways. For that split second, your brain erases the boundary between you and your friend. It maps their physical body directly onto your own internal map. You feel their pain because, neurologically speaking, your brain has decided that they are a part of you. This invisible neural mirroring is the biological foundation of empathy. It is the reason we can cry at a movie when a fictional character loses a loved one. It is the reason a crowd of thousands in a stadium can hold their breath at the exact same moment, their hearts beating in synchronized suspense. We are not designed to be solitary creatures. Our minds are actively, constantly reaching out, dissolving the walls of the skull, and wiring the people around us into our own internal geography. When you truly understand this, it changes the way you look at love, at friendship, and at the devastating pain of loss. Love is not just a poetic concept or a fleeting emotional state. Love is the ultimate act of neuroplasticity. When you spend your life with someone, a partner, a child, a deeply cherished friend, you spend years learning their rhythms, anticipating their reactions, and mirroring their emotions. Every shared laugh, every quiet evening, every intense conversation physically alters the landscape of your brain. You carve massive neural highways dedicated entirely to them. You wire their existence into the very fabric of your own survival. They literally become a part of your biological architecture. This is why grief is so agonizingly painful. When a loved one is suddenly gone, the pain is not just a matter of emotional sadness. It is a profound neurological shock. Your brain has spent years building a map where this person is a vital, load-bearing pillar. When they are removed from the physical world, your neural architecture is left violently unbalanced. Your brain keeps sending signals down those massive, heavily paved highways expecting the familiar response, and it receives nothing but silence. The pain of deep grief is quite literally the phantom limb syndrome of the mind. You are agonizing over a part of yourself that has been amputated. It takes immense time, tears, and exhaustion for the brain to slowly redraw its internal map, to figure out how to stand upright when a piece of its own foundation is missing. We are so much more vast than the limits of our skin. We are living, breathing webs of connection, extending our consciousness into our tools, our environments, and into the hearts of the people we cherish. The future of human evolution will not just be about how we change our own biology. It will be about how widely we are willing to cast our nets. It will be determined by our courage to pull the world in, to feel the pain of a stranger, to adopt the struggles of our neighbors, and to realize that the grandest, most beautiful masterpiece your brain will ever build is not just the map of yourself, but the map of everyone you have ever loved. Chapter 10. The Living Record. Imagine walking high in the treacherous, freezing peaks of a remote mountain range, far away from any modern civilization, and stumbling across an astonishing discovery. A human being, perfectly preserved in the ice for thousands of years. The cold has kept everything intact, their clothing made of animal skins, the primitive tools strapped to their waist, the final, desperate expression frozen on their face. When archaeologists uncover a perfectly preserved ancestor like this, they naturally study the artifacts to understand how this person lived. But imagine, for a moment, if we possessed technology so advanced that we could look directly into the microscopic physical structure of this ancient person's frozen brain. If we could read that intricate web of frozen neurons, we would not just be looking at biology. We would be looking at the exact physical shape of a life. Written into the microscopic bridges of that ancient brain would be the precise map of the terrain they hunted. There would be thick, heavily fortified neural highways dedicated to the unique vocabulary of their lost language. We would find the physical remnants of their deepest fears carved by close encounters with predators in the dark. And we would find the neural architecture of their love, the specific networks forged by the sight of their children's faces or the touch of their partner's hand. Because the brain physicalizes experience, that frozen organ is the ultimate, undeniable record of who that person was. It is a diary written not in ink, but in flesh. But contemplating this frozen record brings us face to face with the great, unavoidable tragedy built into our biology. The human brain is a masterpiece of unceasing adaptation. It spends a lifetime meticulously weaving the raw data of existence into a staggeringly complex, beautifully unique tapestry of wisdom, skill, and memory. Yet, when a human being takes their final breath, that magnificent map is entirely lost. The universe spends decades carving a singular masterpiece uniquely tuned to the world, and then the canvas simply dissolves. The hard drive is wiped clean. If this biological limitation were the entire story of our species, humanity would be completely paralyzed. We would be trapped in an endless, agonizing loop. Every single newborn child would have to start from absolute zero. Every generation would have to independently rediscover how to build a fire, how to forge a blade, how to farm the earth, and how to heal the sick. We would never progress, because every ounce of hard-won wisdom would vanish the moment the elder who discovered it passed away. But humanity did not remain trapped. We achieved something so profound, so fiercely rebellious against the constraints of our own biology, that it elevated us above every other creature on the planet. We figured out how to export our minds. We realized that if the beautiful, complex architecture of our brains could not physically survive death, we had to find a way to copy our internal wiring and store it in the outside world. Think about what is actually happening when you sit in a quiet room and open a book written by a philosopher who died 300 years ago. We treat reading as a mundane activity, but it is nothing short of a biological miracle. That ancient philosopher spent decades painfully carving complex ideas into the neural pathways of their own brain. Then they translated those physical pathways into a series of abstract symbols and carved those symbols into parchment. The book is not just a collection of paper and ink. It is a compressed, frozen piece of human architecture. When your eyes scan those symbols across the page, your brain takes the data, decodes it, and uses it to physically alter your own internal wiring. You are literally downloading a fragment of a dead person's mind into your own skull. You are adopting their hard-won wisdom without having to endure the decades of struggle it took them to achieve it. This is the true, breathtaking definition of human culture. Our songs, our tools, our architecture, our scientific journals, and our spoken traditions. They are all vast external storage drives for the human species. They are the collective living record of our triumphs, our heartbreaks, and our discoveries. Because we have learned to scatter our minds out into the physical world, an infant born today does not have to reinvent the wheel. They arrive into a world thick with the exported neural architecture of billions of ancestors. They get to stand upon a towering mountain of shared, live-wired experience. This realization fundamentally shifts the weight of what it means to be alive. Your brain's unceasing ability to change, to adapt, and to reshape itself is not just a tool for your own personal self-improvement. It is your sacred contribution to the continuous, unbroken chain of human existence. You are not an isolated spark flickering briefly in the dark. You are a crucial link in the longest, most magnificent relay race the universe has ever known. The struggles you choose to face today, the empathy you fight to cultivate, and the deep, complex understandings you patiently build within your own mind, these do not just vanish when you are gone. Through the words you speak to your children, the art you create, the businesses you build, and the love you pour into the people around you, you are writing your internal architecture into the permanent fabric of the world. The chisel never stops striking the marble. The map is forever shifting. You are born unfinished, a chaotic storm of potential waiting for the world to give it shape. But as you navigate the joys and the terrors of this life, you eventually become the architect. You become the world that shapes the minds of those around you and those who will come after you. Your life is the living record. Every day you wake up, you are handed a blank page in the grand story of our species. The pathways are open. The ink is waiting. Make it a masterpiece.